Probably the greatest horror story with PCBs is the Hudson River. I'm sure most of you are familiar with it. You've read about it. General Electric in Troy, New York has been dumping tons, past tense, has been dumping tons of PCBs in the Hudson over the years. So that the bottom sediments in the Hudson for about 40 miles below Troy, remember that New York City is about 100 miles downstream from Troy, for about 40 miles below, the bottom sediments are loaded with PCBs, and in fact about 200 different types of PCBs. These PCBs in the Hudson have become so bioconcentrated within the food chain that the resident species within the Hudson, fish such as eels, some of the salmonids that are present in the Hudson, centrarchids, panfish, bass, etc., are absolutely loaded. They are hot with PCBs. You wouldn't even consider eating those fish. Even the transient species, such as the striped bass that spend most of their life in the ocean and spawn in the Hudson, have bioconcentrated so many PCBs that they're no longer edible. Although their levels have been dropping in recent years, they're still too hot to consume. What are they going to do about the PCBs in the Hudson? Because again, they're persistent. They can remain toxic for over 100 years. Well, there are certain types of microbes or bacteria that break down PCBs, that is, dechlorinate them, but this is a very slow process. Another consideration is that New York State is considering is dredging the Hudson, dredging the bottom sediments, but this would cost up to $280 million. That's the estimate. And since estimates usually overrun, it's probably more than that. But then what do you do with the sediments? Do you bury them? Do you landfill them? Because if you do, those PCBs are probably going to leach out back into water and maybe your drinking water supply. You can't really burn them because when you burn these toxic chemicals, you just liberate a lot of the toxins into the atmosphere, and of course then, as I mentioned previously, they're brought back via precipitation. It's a mess. It's a real mess. And the stories go on and on. In Louisiana, another cancer alley, an area 85 miles long that they refer to as the National Sacrifice Zone. 85 miles of industries that dump up to 100 million pounds of toxic wastes per year into the Gulf of Mexico. Imagine that, 100 million pounds per year. No wonder our oceans are so badly polluted. Nothing can absorb that amount of pollution. In West Virginia, Chemical Valley, dozens of chemical plants making toxic substances. Probably the worst of them is methyl isocyanate. If for some of you that sounds familiar, that's the same gas that killed 3,500 people in Bhopal, India. Toxic metals. We talked about them in the first environmental issue tape. We talked a little bit about aluminum. I want to mention a bit of an update on aluminum. Aluminum is becoming more and more common, unfortunately, in drinking water supplies. Aluminum is a toxic metal, and recently it's been linked to Alzheimer's disease and also to kidney problems. We're finding out more and more about the deleterious effects of all kinds of toxins. I talked about mercury previously, and I want to discuss that a little bit further as well. Mercury is one of the worst of the neurotoxins. It does a tremendous amount of neurological damage in any organism, including man, that gets too much mercury into the system. Probably the saddest story involving mercury pollution occurred fairly close to where we're filming today, just south of us in Syracuse, New York, a lake called Onondaga Lake that received absolutely an unbelievable heavy amount of mercury pollution over the years from industries located on the lake shore, to the extent that Onondaga was known as the most polluted inland lake in the United States. That was its rep. Well, over the years, the mercury pollution has abated, it's cleared up, life is returning to Onondaga Lake, and in fact, conservationists in the area became so optimistic about its future that they had planned by the year 2000 to stock salmon in Onondaga. Well, so much for plans. Recently, they found high levels of mercury in Onondaga again. The source? Apparently, it's coming in from a stream called 9 Mile Creek that flows into Onondaga. 9 Mile Creek, unfortunately, winds through the old waste beds laden with mercury left by the chemical plants. A rather unfortunate legacy. And so Onondaga is lost again for God knows how long. To add insult to injury, if you could, in this case, if you could make it worse, recently they found medical wastes washing up on the shores of Onondaga. Apparently some of the hospitals have been dumping wastes into the lake. I think I've given you enough of an idea of just how bad the situation is. I've been dealing with environmental issues for a lot of years, and to me, toxicity in the environment is probably worse than all of them. What's the future? Well, unfortunately, it's not an easily solvable problem. And it's with us right now. It's not like global warming and ozone depletion that may be further down the road. We got this, we got to deal with it. How do we do it? Well, we've already discussed the fact that you can't burn it, you can't bury it. All we can do is make sure that we do no more of it in the future. We have to stop dumping, liberating toxic chemicals into the environment. Eventually, the environment will deal with it. Organisms will absorb it, break it down, they'll lose their toxicity, and we won't have the problem anymore. But at this point, we just have to stop polluting the environment with toxic chemicals. It's really the only answer.